So thank you everyone for staying for the debate tonight, and thank you very much Graham and Sri for being here as guests. As you know, we are not really guests because we are the the selection committee. I'm Lucía. Srikanth also is part of the selection committee this year, and but also, very knowledgeable about the work of Amit Dutta, so I'm very excited to be able to discuss this further with you. And Graham, as you have noticed, is the filmmaker of the second film you've watched. So thank you very much, both of you. I will pour you some rum in a minute, but before I get you drunk, I wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about while we were putting this program together, which is that these two films that you just watched work with history in a very particular way, no? In the case of Amit Dutta, there is an archive, no? A textile archive that is being intervened in a way, no? So an archive of textiles before the colonial times and during the early colonial times in India, and those, I think it's very interesting how he approaches history from the present by intervening these high resolution scans, which are something that we can only do today with this digital experimental animation, no? And this creates a relationship between the present and the past that I would like to discuss with you, whereas in your case, Graham, there is of course the past, no? The 1939, 1940s, late 30s, early 40s, great moments for cinema, as we have discussed earlier. And there is also this device with which you approach history, no? You have this period film, and the way the image looks is, we could say, complete opposite from what Amit Dutta does, no? Because there is this, I want you to tell how you did this, no? But there is this sense of this texture that it's weirdly analog for a digital film, and I have the feeling that you invented a machine to be able to approach history in this regard. So I wanted you guys to discuss.
Do you want me to explain the machine first, or do we want to talk about the
machine first?
relation?
Yes.
I'll explain the machine just so it's understood for everybody really quickly. An evening song was shot. It's all digital, but it was shot using a large format photography camera. So if you've ever used or seen, one of these cameras with the bellows and a ground glass, no? So the image is made with this camera, and then the digital cinema camera is just recording the glass. So the whole image you're seeing is a projection onto glass, which is why it has this texture and why it has this very hard vignette, because when you photograph a projection, you get a lot of light fall off. So it's like a big 6-stop difference from the center to the corner. So it was made with this analog thing, but it in fact could only be what you were saying even about the high resolution scans. It wouldn't be possible to do without a digital camera. This system, you couldn't. There's not enough light on the back of the glass otherwise. So anyway, that's the machine very briefly. I can show pictures of it later if people are curious, but we move to history, I think is more interesting.
Well, it's good that we know now which machines we are dealing with, no? So we are dealing with high resolution scans and probably After Effects, no? And high resolution digital cameras throughout this analog optical device.
Yeah, but it's like it's a high resolution capture of something that's kind of can't really be. I don't know. I don't know. It's low resolution in a way and high resolution in a way simultaneously, which did remind me of Amit's film as well.
Yeah. So what do you think about this regarding history, no? This approach to the past?
Okay, yeah. Before I begin, a couple of notes of warning. This is my first evening at Woche der Kritik, so please be kind. And secondly, Amit, if you're watching, I'm not speaking on behalf of Amit Dutta, I'm just speaking on Amit Dutta's film. So Amit, if you're watching, please be kind. So the origin of the film probably merits a couple of words. The film, as you saw, Mother Who Will Weep Now, is made entirely from scans of textiles that were made available by the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore in south of India. So Amit Dutta has all these scans at his disposal, and then he's just reacting to the archive that is handed out to him. There is no real information of why these scans are made. I mean, within the film, why these scans were made, what is the origin of these scans, I mean, what is the time period, chronology. I mean, this film is like a textile scholar's nightmare, because there is no taxonomy, there is no chronology, and the scans are not always pristine, and the film doesn't even differentiate between what is good textile and what is like mediocre textile. So everything is like together, smashed together. So on one hand, Amit is purely reacting to the formal qualities of the material, but on the other hand, he is kind of placing them in a historical narrative, most pointedly into a kind of a narrative of Indian textiles making way slowly to British textiles, and you can see these rough contours and kind of unfinished figures kind of making way for more sophisticated figures with foreshadowing and more quality control and so on. So definitely there is a kind of history in the making, but I would imagine that there is an opposite impulse also in the film, which is kind of dehistoricizing everything that is historical. So because the film divorces really like intentionally all material aspects of the textiles from their aesthetic aspects, so that you can have objections about that, but that the film is consciously doing. And there are certain parallels that I also found in your film, Graham. So I mean, we'll come to that later if you have, or maybe I could comment on that, because the first time this is the second time I'm watching your film. The first time when I watched it was so pleasurable to me. I mean, it was just the dissolves. I thought this was the cinephile film par excellence. The dissolves and the superpositions and the layers and so on. And then I started kind of resisting this beauty, because I thought it was becoming too much for me. It was like so obviously pleasurable. It was pushing all my cinephile buttons. But now when I watch it, there's almost like an opposite operation at work, because every time you give us a pretty image, I mean the kind of the I don't know what do you call the vignette format kind of works against it. It's almost reflects our gaze back at us by showing that you're like, it looks like a peephole at some points, and you're kind of interrogating your own spectatorship, so to speak. And even on the level of writing, every time you think there's going to be a zinger or some moment that's going to be really ironic and funny, you kind of undercut that with a very sincere note of very sincere line of dialogue. So I thought there was a very nice balance between beauty and like this resistance to beauty within the film, which I thought was also at work in Amit's film.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I it was my first time seeing Amit's film.
Yeah.
And at first I was watching. I was like, oh, it's an interesting pairing. I guess it's the texture pairing, But then as it went on and I started to realize, I know, but it's like a film about with a lot of jokes.
Yeah.
Amit's film has all these jokes and comments throughout it, and then it does the same thing. What you're saying that I hope Evening Song does, which is you could have a moment that was very beautiful, and then a moment that was funny, and then a moment that was very depressing, and they would be on top of each other, and you'd be getting this strobe the whole time. So I was like, no, I feel quite I feel the relationship with all the things the layers he's forcing through. So no, it's interesting. I thought with Amit's film, one of the things that really stood out to me was I felt it also adapted the format of these these tapestries.
Yeah.
Like, it would have a narrative section in the way that you could have a narrative tapestry, and then it would have an abstract section in the way that a tapestry can be abstract. And it made me feel like it made me want to go look at tapestries in a way, because I felt like he managed to put into cinematic language the language of a different art form, and it was not just to show it, but to like translate it. And I thought that was, one thing. As I know I heard some laughter, so people obviously recognized. I'm a really, really, really big fan of Val Lewton, and one of my favorite things that Val Lewton did that I still think is like a massively underdone cinematic project is adapting visual art into narrative films. So like Isle of the Dead, which is an adaptation of a painting that's here actually in the Gamalda Gallery, and Bedlam, which is an adaptation of engravings. And I was thinking of that when I was watching Amit's film, this idea that you could take a tapestry and make a narrative work out of it.
And what are your thoughts about this relationship to history? You know, you making a film in the present that in a sense wants to approach this past.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's funny because for me, and I think, you know, anybody's interpretation, I'm always like, as a, writer director, it's like, I don't think that I have the interpretation of the work. And in fact, like, you know, watching the film again now, I hadn't watched it through in an undistracted way in kind of a while. I think I have different interpretations of it now as a viewer than I had when I was writing it, than I had when I was editing it and everything. So I'll just preface that I don't think any of this is gospel. But I've always thought I have a kind of complex relationship to the history of cinema, because I think I have a great affection for old cinema, but I also know that there's a kind of fetishistic impulse in me towards elements of it that I kind of want to grapple with when I deal with things like, why do I find this beautiful? Is it just because it's old? Is it just because it has this layer of decay or this separation from me now? And why do I find contemporary images so hard to relate to, or not relate to, so hard to find beautiful? And I do think that the 1939 that the evening song exists in is a fantasy 1939. You know, it's like when you look at a studio Hollywood film that's set during the French Revolution. It's not really about the French Revolution, you know. It's about 1938 when they're making a film about the French Revolution. So I think of it in those terms. I think of it as I'm like a tourist in an imagined past, rather than a historian making, you know, serious statements about that past. So, I mean, it's all a fantasy, though. It's a fantasy film. I don't know if this is answering your question at all of my thoughts.
Yeah, wait, I just wanted to say, if anyone has any comments or thoughts or questions, raise your hand, and I can barely see you. But, yes.
Is a homage that you made. What urged you to make this homage? Because then you write also the distinction of a woman, the appearance of a woman, or the appearance also of. What urged you to make this homage?
Are you referring to the in memoriam card at the end? Yeah. So that card. This film started, the beginning origin of the film started when a friend of mine, Ted Fent, gave me several reels of 35mm film when he was moving to Berlin that he couldn't keep anymore. And he was like, you have to use this to do something. So I thought, okay, I wanted to make a film that would be very short, and I was kind of trying to think of an interesting subject, and I thought I would be interested in making a film about something that doesn't exist anymore, like an extinct animal or extinct plant. So that was how this film started. It was going to be a very short film about this non-existent plant called Thesmia americana. And I only had it had to be like 5 minutes long because of the amount of 35mm I had. So by the time I shot it and edited it needed to be something really short. And then as I wrote this thing about an extinct plant, I ended up with this screenplay. So I didn't use that film, and it kind of went through these different stages of metamorphosis. Like the plant led me to thinking about extinct animals, which was Martha, who's that's the name of the last passenger pigeon who lived in a zoo in Cincinnati there used to be passenger pigeons where like these birds that, the sky would be black in North America from the quantity of these birds. And they died very, very quickly, went extinct very quickly. So Martha was an example of what's called an endling, which is the kind of rare occasion when we know who the last individual member of a species is. And then Barbara Newhall Follett, the writer at the top, who's not the same as Barbara Fowler, the character, but was a big inspiration for her, was a child prodigy who wrote a book called The House Without Windows, who disappeared in 1939. And those traces, this extinct plant, this last passenger pigeon, and the story of this prodigy and her writing were the raw material that inspired the screenplay. Now, nothing in the screenplay is really concretely exactly about those things anymore, but they were so pivotal in my conception of it and the path that I found the screenplay in, that I felt that they had to be recognized at the end, because I knew people wouldn't perceive them otherwise. That it wouldn't be obvious to a viewer like, he was thinking of this semi-obscure writer who disappeared at this point, or so that's the answer to why that card is there.
And did you met Jonas Mekas?
I have met Jonas Mekas, yes.
I think he would like that.
Thank you. I think it's very curious because the two, the pigeon and the person are barely real, but there is a fake natural history to this film. Yeah. And I was thinking in Amit Dutta's film, there is also kind of a fake natural history, because it's made out of fragments, no? So you have this history of colonialism, first through the violence on the land, on the animals, on the vegetation. I don't know if you were thinking about it also.
Yeah, I thought there were two distinct kind of narratives going on. I mean, whatever narrative there was. The colonial history, because Indian textile, the history of Indian textile is basically the history of colonial textile supplanting Indian textile, and then the whole pushback against that under Gandhi's leadership and so on. But also he's also kind of hinting at a universal narrative of humans losing touch with nature. I think, you have first the fisherman community living in some kind of communion with nature, and then you have the guns coming in, and then all the hunting and so on. So I'm not really sure if the colonial angle and this more universal stories are meant to kind of converge at some point. But for sure there is a strong presence of nature in the textiles themselves. And one more thing about Graham's film that I found interesting was that this sort of, it's such an ironic form, heavily ironic form, because not only is this film so cinema aware, but it's also, aware of its own status as like a kind of fantasy representation. All the characters are kind of writing fictions of themselves and each other. And I was wondering if kind of when you're having such an ironic or loaded ironic form, is it more challenging to access the central emotion of the film? Does it all become like a kind of performance, or is it? Do you expect the viewer of a film to kind of take a distance from the emotions in the film? Because I found the film oddly very moving.
I guess I never expect a viewer to do anything, because I think they'll do what they want to do, and I think you try to kind of offer them something that hopefully they can do something interesting with. But for sure I would prefer, and sometimes I worry that all of the dissolves and the constant music and the constant narration of these elements, I know can be alienating to certain viewers. My hope would be that they aren't, that they're able to be, that it's able to function as a melodrama. I have immense respect for the genre of melodrama, so it's certainly like I never intended it in any way to be a deconstruction or a parody or a commentary on this form. I wanted it to be able to kind of exist in a little strange corner, like if there was like a brief moment, you know, when RKO like accidentally hired a kind of like B-list forgotten modernist to write a screenplay, like what would that film, if that film could, that's the film I want to watch basically. So I try to make the film I want to watch, and that's what I think, like, oh, you know, Faulkner wrote all these films, but none of the Faulkner scripts have this crazy flow. So what if you could have this like flow, like a Virginia Woolf Faulkner flow to a C grade melodrama, because that's basically like what I want to watch. So.
And what about the dissolves and the sound dissolves, you know, because characters seem to be dissolving into one another, but then you, at some point, this circular, what is it called? The circular shot rotation. That we are all like so concentrated watching that, and then all of a sudden you realize people are duplicating in a way, you know. And this is something that photochemically, I don't know, it has a whole history in cinema, but now it doesn't happen anymore, you know.
No, I mean it's like when I was editing my first feature, I kind of tripped onto going really far with the dissolves. It's always something that I've liked, you know, like I love in a like especially late silent, some of the like teen Soviet stuff, they go really hard on it, but you get it through the 30s where you'll have these montage sequences that are crazy, you know, you got like trains going, people running on the street, airplanes, clouds, and they only last like a minute or two, and they're almost always edited and photographed by somebody completely different than who made the rest of the film. And I kind of wanted to find a way to like slow down that feeling and hold on to it over a longer film, which I mean, I think you could say that there are in fact some of the City Symphony films that do it, and you know, but not as frequent in a narrative film, and it's kind of a, I don't know, you know, there was this anti-superimposition mindset that came in at some point in cinema. I think that you're supposed to use clean cuts and communicate with cuts, and it became very integrated into the grammar of film. And I always kind of was curious, like, what if the fade was the default and the cut was the exception? And I mean, it's that kind of like simple, but and then you see what you can glean from just like changing the rules a little bit while you're working. You know, it's funny also with Amit's film though, because at one point, like when I was trying to do the storyboards for this film, I thought it should feel like a tapestry, like one of those narrative tapestries where the image runs along and it kind of changes, but it's both one image and a bunch of separate images, which I don't think is exactly how the film feels, but it was a thought I had at one moment.
And this is probably something that ties to what I call irony in your form, in terms of you're kind of taking a form that is mature, in your case the focal pitch montages or the dissolves, and then try to arrive at something really new and raw and sincere. And I think Amit also has something that he does in this film, which is take the poetry of Kabir, who's this 16th century saint. Kabir, I mean, for those who are not familiar, he's a Muslim weaver saint, but who often spoke in devotion of Hindu gods. So he's like this syncretic figure between Hinduism and Islam, and then so the figure of Kabir is very important to the Indian secular imagination. So here, an Indian spiritual tradition, vernacular spiritual traditions, they often kind of invoke weaving or pottery as metaphors of like divine creation. So here, Kabir's lines are talking about, I mean, the weaving that is life itself, or God as an imperfect weaver, and so on. So, and Amit is kind of borrowing from the meter, the form of Kabir's poetries and couplets, and kind of translating them into like frame editing. So he has some inscrutable way of translating the meter of the poetry into the editing pattern of the film. So that's unsubtitled, but he does that. So he kind of discerns 3 or 4 patterns in Kabir's poetry, and then that's forms the editing basis of the film. So and given that and given Kabir's poetry forms a kind of link between weaving and spirituality, I'm wondering if Amit's access to a more spiritual world, because Amit's film is so formal, I'm wondering if Kabir becomes this established form the way 1940s melodrama is in your case, and then he's kind of able to access more higher, not higher, but at least more sincere realms through the vicarious
use it as a to use it as a bridge.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is also, I mean, that's also how I think about genre in a certain way, because I really like works that like I like every genre, honestly, but I like genres. I like it when there's a narrative set of rules, and that there's certain narrative archetypes that you're going to deal with, and that it serves as a shortcut to get you somewhere, and hopefully not to just repeat the same thing, but to explore something else because there is a form that's already present. Which I mean, I think that's how poetry operates, obviously. Also, the structure allows you freedom.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting.
I was wondering, Sri, when you were talking about irony, and in this case, in the case of Motherhood Weep Now, how do you find this irony? Materializes?
Yeah, I mean, irony because because Amit is simply quoting Kabir. First of all, he's not. I don't think the film itself pretends to be or claims to be a spiritual work, but somehow by embodying Kabir's poetry, at least in a formal sense, within its own schema, I suppose the film kind of vicariously accesses whatever Kabir's poetry does. So I think Kabir becomes the form for Amit's film. So I think the presence of Kabir is the channel through which this irony is expressed, because otherwise I see this as a purely formalist film, even though Kabir's presence is so much, and the film is always addressed to Lord Ram and so on, but I don't see this film itself as kind of partaking in those spiritual traditions. But I mean, I can't, maybe Amit thinks differently.
Yeah, but I think it's accessing its own spiritual tradition in the sense that cinema is the spiritual element to it. So each one has their own religion. Clearly, these two films, cinema is the thing, no? Cinema is the goal. and there, to serve cinema in a way, there are all these operations going on, no? Like trying to create movement and relationship between color and texture, no? Or trying to all of a sudden bringing the sound of the weaving, what do you call it? The loom, no? The loom. And it's the same with you created this machine to adore it in a way, and to make it your god.
To kind of and to in some way grapple with whether it's even right to revere some of this in a certain sense. I don't know. That's always because for sure, it's funny to me, even the Christianity in Evening Song, I think in some ways it's my relationship to Christianity has more to do with Frank Borzage than it does with the Bible, and the way he used it is something, so there's layers of that.
So I wonder if you will both claim that cinema is your god, in a way. I mean, you're both heavy cinephiles. There is no god. But cinema is a good substitute.
Well, one thing, Ram, I was curious about was, I want to repeat Martha's line. It's an allegory, isn't it? Barbara being this high-minded literary European figure at the brink of the Second World War, and Dickey being a pulp writer who's. So your film seemed to me, when I watched it the first time, to be a kind of allegory of the end of European influence in American culture and the beginning of the mass culture, and then it was almost like sad and elegiac when I saw the film.
Well, 1939 is an ending year. It's just like it's one of those years in cinema, in literature, in the world, where a bunch of things ended and a bunch of other things started. So, I initially landed on 39 because of Barbara Newhall Follett, the actual writer, because it was the year she disappeared. So I was thinking about it, and there was a whole period where I wasn't sure that I was going to set it then, and I was thinking of different times, and even setting earlier. But I kind of felt like 39. It's I don't know. It's the end of a certain Hollywood. The studio system is going to last, obviously, into the 60s, but you never are really going to have that Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz, which the Hollywood that really still feels like its feet are in the silent era. Its structure, the structure of the film, the way they shot, and the directors all came up as silent directors, without really the focus on realism that you get so immediately when you hit the 40s, which I do think has to do with the war. I think that the war really changed the way fantasy was portrayed in cinema, and you see fantasy really become sidelined in a certain way. So, I don't know. That was a meandering thought, but definitely.
Yeah. For me, the disappearance of Barbara from the narrative, even though she's there till the end, but kind of the spiritual, disappearance of Barbara was somehow it felt like a cultural moment in America itself. The idea that this now is the end of this high-minded European literary culture. The old world is now truly over behind in American culture, so to speak.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's tricky because they don't all scan on each other perfectly, right? Like literary modernism keeps going for quite a long time, and by 39, even a lot of the greatest works of American modernism weren't written yet. But I do think that it is also there's some connection between, even though the old Hollywood is something very, I'm just going off the top of my head right now, so I could be wrong, but even though the old Hollywood is something that is a very hyper commercial, hyper populist object, and this kind of high modernism is this very niche, elitist, specific thing. There's some connection between a way of viewing the world that allows for those things, that allows for like a separation from, in a way, a certain separation from like political reality, that I think starts to become very, very challenging to grapple with as the war goes on, and especially after the war and the post-war period. But these are not developed thoughts and meandering.
I was wondering before, you were talking about this resistance to beauty, that when you were watching Graham's film, there was this, a sense of distrust of beauty, because they were pushing your buttons. So can you talk a little more about that, about this beauty and this?
Yeah, Graham did mention this kind of fervor of dissolve after some point in history, but among cinephiles, it's almost, Mehdi's like in the audience, and he loves dissolves, and so do I, and it's almost
the dissolve era is like returning.
Really,
I think right now we have enough separation from it that the.
So it's almost as if for me it was just that it feels so pleasurable, me as a cinephile. So I'm kind of suspicious. I'm usually circumspect of films that I'm really pleased with immediately. So it's like I really have to struggle before I make my peace with the film. So that was the reason. But here my second viewing kind of clarified it. I felt this was like doing both a thing and its opposite. So it's much more complex than I had thought it was in the first viewing.
And what about Datta's film? Because you were talking about this happening also in that film, no? That the film was in itself approaching beauty and then, taking it away.
Right. So, of course, the textiles are beautiful. They're pretty colorful, and the animation is gentle. But again, if you look at the scans, they're not high resolution in the way we would like on a big screen, and there are dark patches in the textile. And I don't think all the textiles are of really good quality. I mean, he doesn't make a distinction between like important pieces of silk and I don't know what looks like tablecloth and so on. So there is really flattening of hierarchies with respect to the textile archive. So that I think is where I thought it was kind of presenting beauty in terms of, I mean, look at these very finely woven silks with abstract patterns, but also these, I mean, quote unquote primitive line weavings, which are graceful but not always perfect, and so on.
It's probably is an expected response from me, but I found the most beautiful moments for me were the stains. When you could see the stained fabric, I was like, oh yeah, give me more. I wanted more stains.
Yeah, like spoken like a true cinephile. I mean, it's just looking for the grains, right? It's just like, forget the image, give me the grains. Yeah.
But what does this make you think about? You know, this eliminating hierarchies of these different types of beauty, no, in a way.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does. In a way, it makes the film richer, both films, because it's not a very facile, pretty kind of beauty. But on the other hand, this kind of removal of all context is also, I mean, I can imagine people objecting to it, because it's, I mean, he's done similar works with miniature paintings, a film called House of Paintings from 2015, and then he's done that with film posters in a film called Blueprint for a Pleasure Machine from 2022. So in all these films, he kind of uses archive as a given. I mean, there is no questioning of why the archive was made or what's the source of these, I mean, art objects or whatever. So, and then he animates the archive using cutout animation and so on. So, yeah, you could object that by abstracting out the historical information and the hierarchies, you're kind of obscuring the labor behind the production of these objects. I mean, we don't know who wove these and for what reasons, or are they machine woven? Some of them do look like they were machine woven. But for me, the power of, I mean, it's both the weakness and the strength of the film that it does that, because to kind of respond viscerally to objects that exist in the world, no matter where they come from, is also important. I think that's the source of the most productive aesthetic experience.
And I think it would be in a way outside of the scope of the film,
yeah,
to address, you know, the question of who wove this for who. And it does, I mean, it makes you think those questions, though. I think, you know, it's very hard to resist or to not notice the colonial commentary of the film. Yeah. You know, it's quite pointed, and I thought that it's almost, you know, because I almost thought it was too much.
Yeah.
The animation of them shooting with the guns, I almost thought it's a little too much, like it's coming on a little too strong. But then I thought, no, because it really recontextualizes the way I'm thinking about the way the fabric is woven. Yeah. Yeah. And that was what was interesting. Right. You know, that he I think manages to connect, to give you this, to take you into this piece of history, this idea of history, but to use it to make you think about the way the weave is. Yeah. You know, he's not going to give you a whole statement about colonialism in India.
Yeah.
He wants you to think about it for a minute and then look at the pattern again. Right. And that was what I thought was really interesting. You know, it's like a...
Yeah. But there is more to it, actually, than I give credit for, because even as the figures change in nature, I mean, from figures in simple profile, simple contours to foreshortened figures and 3D modeling of the textures, there is a kind of history of representation that is at stake, because Amit Dutta has written a book on this, really. It was a research book about how British schools that were set up, art schools really, in the late 19th century to make painters and produce painters and craftsmen in India, they gave technique to the students. They told them how you do oil paintings and how you kind of how do you use the European Renaissance perspective and how do you foreshorten and 3D model and so on, but without giving them really access to the epistemology that gave birth to such representational systems. So Indian craftsmen could reproduce those high quality images in general, but not really having a philosophical foundation that's founded in the Enlightenment tradition. So but what is lost in kind of moving away from pre-modern representations is exactly what you said, the ways of seeing that vanish. British textile, it looks different, but it also comes from a different way of looking at the world, which is really like the product of the European Enlightenment, and the more simpler figures that kind of are present in the earlier part of the film are also products of a way of looking at the world, and that is what changes when you see. It's not just that the colonial textiles, like there is a material effect of colonialism, because cash crops were exported to Britain and those goods were sold back in India, but also this loss of ways of seeing and kind of severance of craftsmen from their own knowledge systems. This is something Amit Dutta has repeatedly written about and dealt in film. So yeah, that is definitely playing a part in this film.
And that reminds me of this text by another Indian filmmaker, Mani Kaul, you know, The Rambling Figure.
Yeah.
There is this text that in a way starts with raga as a musical form that works within a scale, like you were saying, no? Like to have a genre of something that is a set of rules within which you can improvise in a way, and how that is connected to the, or not connected to the idea of perspective, and how perspective is the thing that makes colonialism happen, because it's the thing that makes, in a way, navigation, and how that dominates not only the gaze but the way of seeing the world, and how cinema as a narrative, as a direct narrative form, in a way, you know, copies the idea of direct perspective, and how different forms of cinema are decolonial because of this idea, no, of working within a different scale, or doing with this a different thing, no, what you were saying, to think about the history of textile, but decontextualizing it and using it as material, no, as color, as shape, as isolated figures. And this, you know, creates a different history, because it creates a different montage, as you were saying, no, imitating almost the patterns of the weaving. That will give you a sense of montage, or how montage should work, and within that idea of montage, creating a different narrative for this colonial history, even, no?
And even in terms of iconography, you see the earlier part of the film is nature and birds and everything, all that, and then suddenly man becomes the measure of things. It's just more and more humans. I mean, that's a little simplistic, but because the half of the film is just doing its own abstract thing, but there is definitely a shift towards more human forms of representation,
and more real and more realistic.
Realistic, yeah, absolutely.
Realistic representations of humans.
Drink a little rum.
Well, work on this rum. I'm like most of my way through the second rum.
I feel guilty about not sharing.
Sorry for alcohol shaming you. But this idea, this also comes what you were saying before, of mixing different types of techniques, no, and different hierarchies within the tapestry, because you can see some are hand embroidered in a very in a very rough way, and some others are highly complex. And there is something about this discussion about craft and art, and high art and low craft, or high craft and low art, within the writers in the film, no? You know, she's a poet, and she's like a genius writer, and he's a pulp writer, so he writes, you know, craft.
He writes in a different genre.
Yeah, but in the film, there is the good artist and the...
Yes, but I also think that I think even the film content of the film complicates that in some ways, because you know, she's a good writer who doesn't produce anything, and I think the only person really that we hear refer to himself as a bad writer heavily is Richard himself. You know, there's a little bit of snide Barbara comments, and you know, Martha doesn't like the sci-fi book, which we can question whether that's just taste or the quality of the science fiction book. But you know, ultimately, I don't know. I like the things Richard writes. So I don't mean to. I hope to elevate him, not denigrate him, despite his oafish nature. I want to set them. I want to set them on the same level.
Yeah.
I want to set the Pulp Fiction and the High thing at the same level.
I mean, you do, but they don't, and that's because it's a play of point of view, no?
Yeah,
it's what you were saying before, no? It has to do with the construction of
Right.
a vision, no? Of
Yeah.
how the world is organized.
For sure. I mean, it's constantly, your voiceovers are constantly, the moment we are identifying with the inner monologue of one character, I mean, Richard is talking about his feelings for Barbara, and then suddenly Barbara is talking about Martha and so on. But Richard also kind of struck me as somebody who's really sophisticated in the way that American failed journalists and authors of the 40s, they're just slumming in journalism. This is like, yeah, I'm doing this, but like I'm drowning myself in alcohol because I'm truly an artist, but I'm just doing this for the paycheck. Yeah. But probably Richard isn't that. Probably he does believe in what he writes in.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that I think that you had this generation of writers who all on some level I think wanted to be F. Scott Fitzgerald, and then it ended up spiraling in a bunch of different directions. But I mean, I think the American genre fiction, American horror fiction is kind of unimpeachably high quality in my opinion. It's like remarkable the amount of horror and crime fiction that were produced from the 30s through the 60s in America. I think it should be regarded as one of our great cultural contributions to the world. So.
On that note, does anyone has a question or so many? First in the back and.
Hello, I'm Mehdi. Srikanth just mentioned me.
Hey, Mehdi.
Yeah.
Ask about dissolves.
You're the dissolve guy.
Yeah, I'm the dissolve guy. Yeah. So yes, I think Graham already touched upon what I want to ask, but I'll try to arrive at a question. It might be a bit long-winded because your film triggered a lot of emotions in me, and it resonated with me a lot. Precisely,
your Facebook posts trigger like deep
All the
emotions in
dissolves.
me all the time. It's like right. Almost the only reason I open Facebook is to see if you posted something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad to know that my Facebook posts have been useful.
I second that.
Yeah. No, I have always referred.
I gotta watch this.
Right. I have always referred to FBS Film Book because I've connected with so many cinephiles on Facebook and learned a lot about cinema from Facebook actually. Not from Facebook, but from the people that I connected with on Facebook. So anyway, but your film actually, because it's so close to what I have been experimenting with, also my first film that Srikanth had written on briefly, that also kind of tried to, maybe imitation is not the right word, but for the lack of a better word, I mean it tried to
follow.
A silent film form, and it had intertitles and anyway. So, but at the same time, it also magnified my anxieties about my own, experimentations, I would say, or my praxis. Yeah, because when you see someone else doing something so similar, it gives you that objectivity, and it really magnifies your anxieties, regarding your own aesthetic. So, I'll try to arrive at a question, but so for me also, history has always been I have always seen history through the lens of cinema. So whenever I'm making a film, or when I'm in the process of making a film, I'm always, I'm always having a dialogue with the history of cinema. And that's how I look at history. So I can say that all my films are about my relationship with the history of cinema, right? And I also related very strongly to what you were saying about the silent film era and the post-silent film era, because that era for me was very inventive, the 1930s, and just the beginning of sound, because
it can't help but be inventive.
Oh,
they didn't
absolutely.
have a choice.
Absolutely. And now we find ourselves in a similar situation. This era has been compared a lot to, to the silent film era, and because of the possibilities, the cinematic possibilities, and yeah. But at the same time, I feel, about my own films, because they also have very strong political context because of the region I'm from, and like growing up, I had seen a lot of political violence, which was very common in my region back then. I'm from Assam, which is a region in the northeastern part of India, and there was a militancy in the 90s. So that also informs my films. So sometimes I wonder, like, if is this adequate? Because I feel that my concerns, my political concerns, not my film concerns, but they always overlap, of course. Yeah, but sometimes, like, I have this doubt, like, is this adequate? Like, am I being too nostalgic about cinema? For instance, I feel that Abel Gance's Laru, my French pronunciation is horrible, but I feel Laru is the zenith of cinema. Like, you cannot top Laru, Like, when I see Laru, or any silent film for that matter, I feel like it's cinema of the future, like 100 years from now, people will make films like that. So, but at the same time, I feel like when I'm making my films, like, am I being too nostalgic? Like, should I make militant films? Because my concerns are resonant with the militant cinema of the 60s.
Do you like watching militant films?
I love the films of Masao Adachi, for instance, or the Zigabato
sure.
group.
Yeah.
Or Solanas, and like I really, I mean, that is another period that like I relate to a lot. But that is not what I do, because I love melodrama, I love the silent era. So sometimes I ask myself, like, is this adequate? So I want to know your doubts actually regarding like what you're doing and your relationship with cinema. Like, do you sometimes feel that this is not adequate, or like what are your doubts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that I've said this before, and I'm just quoting somebody else, so I guess I'll say it again. But there was a thing that had a huge impact on me as a cinephile and as a filmmaker. I hadn't really made films much when I first read this, but there was an interview with Jacques Rivette that in English it was published in Senses of Cinema. I don't know where it was original. I don't remember where it was published in France, but the best part of this interview is Rivette just talks a whole bunch about a bunch of films he's seen recently, and Rivette watches everything, right? So he's got comments on all sorts of different high, low, popular films throughout this. But there's like a point where the interviewer says something to him, and I'm paraphrasing heavily, but it's something about like, I've talked to a lot of young filmmakers who say they don't want to watch other people's films because they want to be influenced. They want to make their films. And Rivette said something to the effect of, if you've seen 10 films, every idea you have about film will come from the 10 films you've seen. And if you've seen 10,000 films, the things you're stealing and drawing from will start to become so abstract and complex that you'll express yourself, because the copying has become too complex. And to me, that it really struck true. I think it's like, to think that you're not going to be under the thumb or the sway of history in any art form, I think is impossible. Like, if you don't watch it because you don't want to be influenced by it, you're going to be influenced by it anyway. So, I would say, I don't know, watch the silent films, watch the militant films, and make like militant silent films. I mean, it's like, that sounds good to me.
He already does, yeah.
So there you go.
Your microphone says out one. Yeah, there's a little yellow label down. It's the out one microphone. But what are your doubts, Because he asked me for your doubts.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I think I had... what are my doubts? I don't know. My doubts mostly have to do with whether it makes sense to make films that so few people are going to ever see. Whether it makes sense to spend all this time and money making something for these extremely small audiences. That's my biggest doubt making films, because then you have the question of, would it make more sense to try to make some kind of big popular film, but then what's the point of that unless you're just making money? So then you kind of come into a spectrum of like whether it makes sense to do something that requires, especially this much, the resources. I mean, actually, to tie this to yesterday's conversation, I mean, the thing I really think about a lot, and I produce also, is the use of resources. Is it worth the time? Is it worth the amount of garbage? Is it worth the money? You could take this pool of money and you could donate it to something and really change people's lives. Or you could make this thing that in the end is it just a bauble? That's my doubt. You know, is it just like a pretty object for some smart people to talk about in like a room altogether? That would be my biggest doubt, and I don't really have an answer to that. But the only way I've dealt with that is that I think, okay, when I was young, the thing that mattered to me were the films that I saw and the books that I read. So if it mattered to me before it was part of my active life, it matters to someone else. And even if that person doesn't see it now, maybe in 100 years, if you properly archive the hard drives, you know, someone will see it and it will mean something to them. Because the films that have meant a lot to me, I don't know that they meant that to the people who made them. You know, they were mostly commercial endeavors. It was mostly a paycheck. So I think, you know, when you're making any kind of piece of art, it's just like it's hard to understand what it'll mean outside of yourself. Yeah. I don't know. So those are my doubts. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Right. There's actually, if I may just, yeah. So there's actually a moment from film history, you know, which I tell myself, you know, to because like when I have these doubts, so there is, I think in Argentina, you know, when Claudio Caldini and, I mean, there was this whole experimental scene, Claudio Caldini and Narcisa Hirsch, is that how you pronounce?
Narcisa Hirsch, we're showing one of her films on Wednesday.
Right. So I think it was Solanas who criticized the whole experimental scene because Solanas was making militant films, and I think he spoke about Caldini that you know, like Argentina has this authoritarian military government and this guy is just shooting his flowers, you know, like and I always tell myself that, you know, in times of war, like even if you shoot flowers, and that can also be an act of resistance because it can give people peace, you know, to just see that. So that is what I tell myself, that every kind of cinema like has its own place. And yeah.
Yeah, there's also a part of in English is the hour of the furnaces, no? La hora de los hornos, in which he criticizes the Di Tella Institute, which is the big contemporary art, you know, like avant-garde institute. And there is a big fight between these two, no? Like the political, you know, it's the two avant-gardes, no? This idea, the political and the aesthetical, no? And we still have this discussion in film school with my students to this day.
Sullivan's Travels.
Eh?
It's Sullivan's Travels, right? It's Sullivan's Travels. It's like, what matters? Do you have to make a social film that says something important, that communicates something important, or do you make a comedy? And can you do both?
I think in your case you can do both, no? I mean, if you like propaganda or militant cinema, you can mix them. No, I mean, I don't know, Raimundo Gleiser, no? He's a great filmmaker.
Silent militant melodrama.
I mean, silent militant melodramas sounds great to me, you know?
With a little bit of sex.
Is that basically Archangel, the Guy Madden film? And we are approaching Archangel.
It's a bit of like Julio Ludueña in Argentina was that, you know, militant cinema with a bit of sex.
Just a bit of sex.
But
that's, yeah.
You had a question, no? I know. Someone else had a question or a comment or a silent militant film with a little sex.
I could ask a nerdy question.
Wait, there is
a nerdy question?
Yeah.
Wait, there is someone with the mic there, and then
We got a nerdy question in the front.
Do you?
Yeah, I would love to, first of all, thank you. It's my first experience in a film festival. And I'm a friend of the animator who was involved in Dutta's film, Amit Dutta's film, so it's a pleasure. Also, Graham, lovely to hear your thoughts, amazing. I would love to know from you, like, what part of the creative process do you enjoy the most? It's amazing to hear your inspiration, but I'm super interested as a new media designer, and I engage a lot with narrative and sound. So just anything that you would like to give out to a young artist that could be helpful for him.
So wait, was it two questions? What do I enjoy the most, and thoughts to a young artist?
Yes.
Okay. Enjoy the most? Shooting, definitely. The shooting is the fun part. All the other parts are fun. In my opinion. But then, you know, it's interesting because I work with other directors also, and I know a lot of directors absolutely hate the shooting and love all the other parts. For me, it's the shooting. because I like to be with everybody, and you have the lights. It's exciting. I don't know. It's like, you're making a movie. I that doesn't get old for me. So for me, that's the shooting. I don't know. Advice. I don't know if I feel like I need advice in life, so I feel like reticent to give advice to anybody.
You are young.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not as young as I used to be. I don't know. You just gotta do. I don't know. Do what you're interested in and trust that somebody else is interested in it. I think if you try to make things for other people, it doesn't work. That's my experience. You just have to make it something you're interested in. Trust that across the billions of people, there's somebody else who cares about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your response.
Can we hear the nerdy question?
Yeah, I want the nerdy question.
Wait for the mic.
I was wondering, maybe this reveals my age, but I was wondering about your machine, and I was remembering this brief period when we were all using Mini 35 adapters. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Keep going.
Mini 35 adapters? You could buy these on
Was it when you were adapting the 35mm lenses onto the digitals?
Yeah,
early digitals.
Yeah, on a ground glass. Because that was what was reminding me of when I saw it, and I was wondering if it was a similar kind of system or not really.
It's not. I mean, it is using ground glass. It's a lot more unwieldy. I can show you a picture of it afterwards. Just find me when we're done, and I'll pull one up on my phone. But I mean, it's quite like it's focused on the glass. So
is
the
the
glass
moving or not?
No.
That's what
Glass
I
is
thought.
static.
In fact, because I remember with the Mini 35 thing, is sometimes the glass would not move because they were kind of like
they were supposed to kind of go like this, right? Yeah.
But then sometimes it wouldn't, and then it would have this sort of effect. And I remember even then thinking it's actually kind of nice.
Yeah, I wanted the texture of the glass.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Because it was like, for me, it was like when I because I did a lot of photography in college, especially, and the first time I used a large format camera or a medium format camera. I mean, you're always looking at a ground glass, right? You're looking at a ground glass.
Yeah.
But it's just a lot more apparent the bigger that glass becomes. So I actually think it was really the first time I used a medium format camera. And you look at that glass and you think, why the hell does this look so good?
Yeah.
Like, why doesn't the photograph look like this? The photograph's all sharp and crisp and clean. This thing is like blooming, fluid, watercolor, like the movement is so beautiful. And when you look at it, like, I realized when I started using large format cameras, I felt like I could just look at anything. Yeah. Like, I could point the camera at anything and spend like an hour just being like, wow. And then, so that was what I wanted. That was why I wanted to get from it.
Yeah, I mean, it looks, the patina, it's just amazing. And then the focus stuff, is that just goes like in relation to the sort of the camera that's shooting in relation to the
the focus stuff. There's two things going on. Right, one, since it was a 4x5 camera, so 4x5 inch frame, and we're not quite using the whole thing, right? Because the aspect ratio difference is pretty stark, but it's they don't make a digital camera with a sensor that large. So you've got a lot of depth of field because you're dealing with basically a huge, large format sensor. So it's much bigger than 70mm or something, or whatever IMAX, much bigger than that. So there's a lot of very shallow depth of field, and since you're using a bellows camera, you can tilt shift everything, and I think every single shot has some amount of tilt on it. I don't think there's a shot with no tilt in the film.
So it was giving me almost like optical printing kind of effect because of that.
It's just a thing that it's something that's very common in photography and not that common in cinema. There are tilt shift lenses, 35mm tilt shift lenses, like proper cinema ones. They're just, I think there were 2 sets made. My DP was like, can we just use these next time?
Then I have a not nerdy question. Can I have one more? I mean, I was just this is not I'm just kind of curious about, and I think this goes to your genre quoting thing. Maybe I'm curious how, but I was thinking that you have, you've cast like one character as a bird, well, they're not a bird, but they're a bird.
They're a bird, yeah.
They're a bird, and then and the sort of changeling, and there's a lot of sort of push. In some ways, there's a lot of pushing against the sort of self-determined human protagonist kind of thing. But then the film ends in this very sort of heteronormative kind of resolution, right? So I'm kind of curious about how you see those two things playing off of each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll just respond off the top of my head. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I mean, I think on terms of I would say in general, I would, and this is even something I'd say to myself, I would like a less anthropocentric, give me the word, anthropocentric narratives. I think that we're far too human focused. I do not believe in the transcendental specialness of humans. Personally, I think we're animals. So I do have issues with a heavily human-centric way of viewing everything. That's hard to get out of because it's hard to not use humans in the way you work. You know, it's not in the final version of this film, but in the full script, we learn that in Barbara's book, that the unpublished manuscript has no humans in it, and it is only conversations between trees and wind and grass and clouds and things like this. So that would be my response. So I want that. I can't quite figure out how to get it, but I think less humans is good. I'm anti-human. And and then wait, what was the second part of that question?
The second part was that, but then it ends on this very
the heteronormative.
It feels very human.
yeah. Well, and I guess I hope that the ending on the heteronormative resolution is. I guess I would say I intended to be not unproblematic, or I would like the viewer to maybe feel like it is an unsatisfying way for the story to end. If that makes sense. The hyper heteronormative, I hope it doesn't feel like, fantastic. Like she ends up with him and she has a kid and she's a housewife for the rest of her life. That's the way most melodramas end.
That's what I was thinking. I was wondering whether this was, that maybe to also go to the earlier point of like the whole quotation thing, right? Like at which point is it, I think you asked that question maybe about like the sort of gap between quotation and, but anyway, I was wondering if it had to end that way because it was a melodrama.
Well, I felt that it didn't, I mean, I could have ended it however I wanted, right? Like I could have, it didn't have to end that way, but it felt like in the context of the characters, that was how it ended. And I wanted there to be this feeling of like a ghost of another possibility that was different than the story you got. And I kind of wanted to find a way for that ending to both be empowering in a way for Martha and kind of depressing at the same time, which I think is also a melodrama staple. Right. Empowering and depressing is how it's supposed to end. Happy melodramas they miss the note on how the genre works.
Yeah, also like at this point another history starts, no? The history of all these writers going to Hollywood, and this is another movie, no? This is like the Henry King movie where Scott Fitzgerald is depressed and abusive, no? This this history ends, the 30s, and the new history starts, the 40s, no?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're rushing towards the bad and the beautiful, and in a lonely place, and a different. You could keep going. You could have that relationship fall apart, and alcoholism, and
exactly.
and Martha then started another relationship with like a young hunky gardener or something like that in the 50s, and just keep going.
Sympathy and sympathy.
Yeah.
Finally. Yeah, I feel like we have less light because we have to end, no? Yes. No? Accident. So, but because there's a reception outside, so I don't know.
They're all waiting. We've been drinking, and I feel a little guilty because I
Yeah,
feel like
I
we're
was
preventing
going
you
to-
guys from drinking.
So, should we go to the reception? But first, an applause for the guests. Thank you very much.
But we can keep talking while you all drink to catch up to us.